Welcome back, everyone, to Merge Conflict, where Frank and I basically just argue before we get on a podcast, other than I just hit the start record button. So, Frank, you're somewhere where it's hot. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm a little in less decor than usual. Is that even a word? It's hot, James. I am in the state of emergency, state of New York. There's a lot of states happening here, and the most important state is it's hot. No, let me repeat, it's hot. I kind of miss the Pacific Northwest, but you were in Spain. Like, isn't that hot also?
It
But
was a hot.
New York hot.
It was hot. It was a dry heat, so it was pretty.
Hmm.
Well, it depends. Like Malaga was more humid, and then Barcelona, which is getting up to the hundred-esque degrees, definitely was warm, but it was dry. But one of the big things walking around Madrid, even though it was hot, is that there's a lot of trees, and there's a lot of shade, so you can kind of just like get under, and it's
Yeah.
like significant. So when I lived in Arizona, you know, well, it does get very hot. There are a lot of misters. There's AC, obviously, but also if you can find yourself some shade, it is dramatically like the dry heat, dramatic drop in temperature is a big deal compared to if you're in super humidity
Right.
and you're finding shade. It is still hot because the humidity is really dragging you down, which I'm assuming in New York you have the humidity problem.
Yeah, you just described it perfectly. I don't think there's any difference between the shade and just sitting out there in the sun. I'm pretty sure at 99.99% humidity, it just doesn't make a difference. The little water molecules transmit all that heat right through your skin, right into your soul. That's how it works. And somehow it still dehydrates you. I don't know how that hydration stuff works, but science.
Yes. Not, I will say I got back. I'm back. I feel better. I'm almost 100%. So doing a little bit better. I hope that you make it through the heat wave, the heat dome that we seem to be getting every single year. We'll make this podcast a little bit shorter, but also not that short because we got topics to be talking about, Frank Kruger. Because
Yeah.
before I left, I actually did put out a video on some new updates in and around VS Code and VS and MCP servers support. So Model Context Protocol, which we've done episodes on, I've done tons of videos on. And that is because the MCP standard, two things are happening, Frank. One is that
Yes.
more people are implementing the full standard. Okay.
Hmm. Hmm.
And two, there are new things being added to the standard to in the specification to add more features and functionality to it.
Can I add a third point?
Yes.
Um, there's like an MCP committee now. So there are people being paid dollar bills to add to the standard. And when people get paid to do something, they tend to do it. So I feel like part of this is the fault of whoever hired that committee and started paying them money to work on MCP. So I learned just a few weeks ago, thanks to James, what MCP is and how important it is to our AI future. It used to be such a simple protocol, James. It was just you open standard in, you read in a few lines of blah, 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 maybe some JSON. You do some blah, blah, blah. You return something in JSON, and then all the networks are happy. The most sophisticated part was one MCP server could run multiple tools. That was about it. That was the extent of the complexity. Each tool took some parameters, maybe a schema. I'm not even sure schemas were supported. So I am curious to find out what this committee is doing to my beautiful, simple MCP protocol and how it's now complex.
Yeah. Well, I think a few things is the transport layers have sort of evolved a little bit and the authentication bit has evolved a little bit. So obviously we have the standard in and out, but also we've seen a rise of remote MCP servers, which is a new, which did exist um, in the standard, but there weren't that many remote MCP servers because the clients didn't implement them
I
very
see.
much.
I see.
So the clients now implement them. So you can now just give it a
Oh,
URL and it will connect. So for example,
connected.
Git, go really quick. So for example, GitHub is a good example with this. Is like GitHub previously, you would install the configuration, it pull down the container image, run it in Docker, you pass in your personal access token and go, right? Now
Hmm.
it's like, here's the URL, boom, configure it, log in. I'm already logged in with GitHub, configure it, I'm auth. We're good to go here, right? So that's
Yeah.
kind of the new thing because streamable HTTP and HTTP client to server messages are now supported as well.
Oh, okay. That is sophisticated. Yeah, it was getting into a fun tangent there where, in terms of transport protocols, I was seeing a lot of MCP servers implemented as Docker containers, images, whatever you want to say, but they were still talking standard IO. And then I think that was how your monkeys example worked. In fact, you had like a Docker that talked standard IO for the MCP itself, but then could actually go out to the internet via its own little web APIs or whatever and
Mhm.
go do stuff. So what you're telling me now is even in the beginning, even in the early standard, there was a remote thing there, and I just didn't know because I kind of loved how 1970s it was with using standard in and standard out. No one ever programs against standard in, standard out anymore. So I thought that was kind of cool that it did
Yeah,
that. But that was in there from the beginning.
it kind of was, yeah, because it had the
Hmm.
server sent events and the protocol into it. And for example, like Azure Functions and App Service could host your HTTP, your server sent events protocol, and you could put in a URL and you could connect to it. And there's a little node app, the MCP inspector that you can run, that you can connect to standard IO, or you can connect to SSE, for example, and give it a URL. So the monkey server actually is implemented twice, and there's only like 2 lines of code difference between standard IO and not, because it's all the same. But
Okay.
basically, you could then host it somewhere. The problem, though, Frank, was was that um most clients did support SSE. The problem was authentication. How do you authenticate to things, right?
Yeah.
And there was
Yeah.
no authentication specification. And
Not then.
then, so what do you do if you deploy a remote thing?
You do horrendous things. That's what you do.
Yeah, you pass your personal access token around and this thing, I don't know. It's a little bit funky. You know what I mean? It just feels not great because then you want to authenticate. So, one of the things that
Yeah.
happened is that the authentication specification came to fruition. And then things like VS Code and Visual Studio and Cloud Desktop and all these other things also implemented that as well. So now when you go in, if there's authentication required, it'll just pop up normal OAuth and you're off to the races.
Okay, so just to be clear, let's say I'm Frank programmer and I'm programming and I write my own little MCP server, but then I'm also like Frank SaaS. Frank SaaS wants to make some money on his software as a service. And therefore I have user accounts, therefore I make people pay for blah, blah, blah. You're saying that there's an authentication protocol I can implement on my MCP server that does all this? Or is it one level higher? Is this MCP people like Frank Dev has to do? Or is it somewhere else in the stack?
You just do like OAuth too, and it just like does it.
Yeah,
I don't know. It's not like a
good old
special
OAuth too.
thing. Yeah, it's just like it's just standardization, right? So like you
Yeah.
implement standard ASP.NET Core authentication with the MCP SDK, and then you're good, basically.
Have you added that to your monkey example? Because I get everything from you, James. I need you to guide me on my MCP tab. I need the monkeys to
I
authenticate.
I have added a few new features that are implemented now in the MCP spec in the Monkey MCP server. However, I have been thinking about deploying a remote Monkey MCP server where you can track your and add your own unique monkeys and things, and then you'd want to authenticate yourself as well. So I've been thinking about it, but I'm not
Good.
there yet, Frank, because I also don't want to pay to host my MCP server because actually, like,
Oh,
having a container is free. So
yeah, fair enough. Right, because you need the full infrastructure, I guess. If you're doing OAuth 2, then you need some static pages that are actually doing the login.
and these all
Let me
make sense to
remind
have
you that,
different. They all make sense to have different things too, right? Like I don't think like some people are like, oh, I'm just only going to do remote. I'm going to do this or I need this and that. It's like, well, yeah, not every tool like is right for the right thing. So, for example, like Playwright, it is just running an NPX package, right? And it's not even
Mhm.
running in a container or anything like that because it just needs to run an application that can communicate with the LLM and run commands, right? Like it doesn't need a remote server thingy to do anything. That would be silly to be hosted that way compared to just like running it and executing on your local machine, which makes logistical sense, right? So I think there's a lot of room for
Yeah.
why multiple protocols here exist.
Yeah, those are the transport protocols. And in fact, I was a little bit confused by your monkeys example at first because you went straight to the containers. I didn't realize that you didn't need to do that actually. I was a little bit confused in the beginning. So much so that I saw that Docker has started their own registry. Seems like everyone is starting their own MCP registries, but you can go get the latest Docker desktop, and it even has its own little registry hub, and you can plug in new little MCP servers there. And at first I thought that was like, oh, that's the best, smoothest way to do it. But, realistically, like a .NET global tool could be an MCP server. The server part was a little misleading to me. I don't know how they got those names.
Yes, I agree with you. The word server implicitly makes you think that it's being deployed somewhere. But no, you're totally right. Like it is just something running somewhere, an application running
Hmm.
somewhere, whether it be locally with a .NET Global tool, which is also valid, inside of a container, which is just running your application, right? It just depends who has a runtime. The reason I did the container is because I didn't want people to have to worry about installing .NET, right? If you
Yeah,
have a global
yeah.
tool, you need .NET. If you have a Python package, you need Python. If you have like all you need
Hmm.
all this stuff compared to boom, I pull it down. Now, of course, then you need Docker and you need to run that. That's a whole different story. Compared to a remote server, it's like it just runs. And yeah, actually, funnily enough, like there is a new register. They announced this at Build, but there's a specification for building MCP registries. So you are starting
Oh,
to see a
geez.
bunch of MCP registries out there and integrated tools. In fact, the VS Code website /MCP, code.visualstudio.com/MCP, has a way of browsing a bunch of MCPs, and then you can click install the MCP server directly into VS Code with one
Hmm.
click. And I'm sure that'll be it. I imagine they would do something even closer into the product at some point, which would be great. But it's kind of like a hand curated list, which is really cool. But funnily enough, there are other types of things that MCP servers, model context protocol servers, can have. Right now, we talk a lot about tools, right? Go get me the
Hmm.
monkeys. Go give me the details of this monkey. Go add a monkey. Go remove a monkey. Go do a thing and process a thing, right? There's other things that are built into it. Those are tools, calls tools, but there are also resources and there's also prompts. And
Oh.
prompts are simple because you can define your own prompt file. So, for example, forever, you could say, new project.prompt.md or new service.prompt.md or new widget.prompt.md. And you could run that prompt in VS Code or Visual Studio or whatever else you're running and basically get a Copilot or whatever AI tool you're using. It's just a reusable script, but you could define like what tools you wanted to use, right? So only use, the GitHub tools right now, or only use the Playwright tools right now. I'm kind of in this mode that's in
Mhm.
there. So that's nice when you're kind of trying to not type things over and over and over again. The cool thing about reusable prompts in MCP servers is that MCP servers can now give you and supply you dynamic prompts on demand to interact with the LLMs that are there. So, for example, if you were building an iCircuit one, you could basically expose a bunch of prompts to your user or to yourself to, add this widget, and then it could ask you for parameters, right? So let's say you're adding a diode. Is that a thing that you add a diode?
It is, in fact, there's a few kinds of diodes, but yes, there's definitely a diode you can
So
put.
imagine you have an iCircuit MCP and you say diode, and it says what kind of diode, and then you list out the diodes that are available and ask you for voltage of a diode, color.
Yeah, you could say the breakdown voltage. Sure, sure.
Yeah.
Probably the beta though. Yeah.
Anyways, other
Good
parameters
job.
that
Good
you
job.
may need. There you go. I've tried. So, anyways, you could then like describe it, and then what it will do is it will provide the prompt back to the LLM, and then you can execute the prompt for you, right? So you could imagine a good way of doing that is like I think like GISPad or GISPad. I always say it wrong. There's an MCP server for that, and then you could say, "Give me the details of this GIS," and and you could type it in, or you could say /GIS details, and then it will say, "Okay, what is the GIS number, or what is it gives you a bunch of them back, and then it will then give you the prompt to execute." Right, so that's kind of nice from a reusable one. Or you can imagine your MCP server, and you're like, "Hey, I want to provide a list of best practice prompts to my users," right? So I think Playwright has
Mhm.
prompt in it, which is like, explore mode, and it'll go off and explore your application and generate scripts for you. So it kind of is like, here's what I think a great prompt is for you when doing this type of thing with the MCP that can also fill in variables, for example.
Now, let me ask you about that because I've seen these dynamic prompts insofar as they're like Mad Libs or templates, where they'll just have some blanks and you fill in the blanks. Is that what you're talking about? Or are you talking about you actually receive information and then an LLM generates the prompt? You know what I mean? Like it spits out a new long prompt.
I could do either. I could do either.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah,
Yep. It's fun.
yeah. Yeah, so I can kind of do both
Wild world.
based on what it's doing. So, for example, imagine you were building a. This is great. Imagine you were building a .NET MAUI MCP server, right?
Mhm.
You could basically, have like new custom control, new blah blah blah,
Yeah.
new whatever, and then it could define all the best practices. So instead of .NET MAUI, like in the template defining a bunch of prompts for you, right? The MCP server can dynamically be creating these prompts and adding new prompts and doing stuff for you automatically based on what you want. So I think that's a good usage from developers' perspective. But like, yeah, okay, like here's a new custom control, new view model, new whatever, and it would it would have like a beautiful prompt that would define to the LLM what to actually go do based on these best practices.
Yeah. That's cool. Sorry, I just want to rewind for a moment back to the authentication and remote MCPs because something was just occurring to me. I'm staring at my iPhone right now, and I was thinking about how if you want to use an MCP server on like a mobile app, which is where I make my living, you can't really because you can barely run your own software on an iPhone.
Mhm.
It's hard to execute other people's stuff. So you really do want to be using the remote MCP kind of stuff if you want to use those kinds of features. So I just wanted to put that out there. I was like, why in the world would you want to run a remote? As devs, we're pretty accustomed to running any random script off the internet on our machines. But I think if you're actually writing a really real app for users, and especially if it's a mobile app and probably, yeah, even a web app, you're probably gonna have to use the remote MCP servers versus local ones.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think we'll see a whole bunch of remote MCP servers that plug in that way. But totally, like they might just be connected under the hood. So imagine you were building an app and you're like, oh, you know what I want to do is like integrate in, the GitHub MCP server for some reason. I could implement all the
Mhm.
APIs and do everything where like I guess I'll just like become a client and like connect to this thing and like then like everything just works. I don't need to know about the APIs, right? I don't
Yeah.
need to know about things changing because the remote MCP server will figure it out. So it is kind of like that nice wrapper on top of the APIs if it's remote. And then it
Mhm.
defines like what it wants to actually um,
Yeah.
give you. So that's kind of cool. So yeah,
Okay, sorry, I just had to interrupt you
no,
there
good.
because it was just occurring to me. I'm like, yeah, okay, those are actually kind of required in a
Yeah,
lot of scenarios. It's not just a fun little thing.
no, it's good. Okay, so resources or so prompts. Prompts are done.
Prompts,
Tools,
very cool,
prompts,
very
very
cool.
cool.
Can
And
I
then
guess
there's
at the resources?
the resources. The next one, yeah. What do you think resources are?
Can I just declare to anyone who consumes my MCP server, yo, bro, I've got a million documents on turtles and monkeys, and then somehow provided an index through embeddings? Like, this is feeling like the reg thing. Okay, I'm all over the place. I have no idea what I'm asking for. What are MCP resources, James?
I mean, you were basically 99% there, to be honest with you.
Yes. Like,
They're core primitive. It allows servers to expose data and content that can be consumed. So that could be file contents, it could be database records, API responses, it could be screenshots, images, PDFs, log files, pretty much anything. It just has a resource path
yeah.
and they can be plain text, it could be JSON, XML, it could be binary files. So, for example, like maybe you're doing a bunch of work with audio video and you have your own MCP server that's, processing video files or audio files, and you can add resources and remove resources to your MCP server because again, it's an API that you can call. So imagine you're working with an AI and it's an audio processor. So you're like, oh, go get me, you don't even have to say, oh, go get me. You say like, click add context resources and it lists all the resources available. So for example, I could have a list of resources of monkey images or baboon or capuchin, and it would just list all the monkeys. So you don't need to guess at the monkeys or ask the LM at the monkeys. I just say, here's the monkeys, right? Or here is a code sample, or here is a list of all the GIFs, right? Or here is all of the log files. So a great example of this would be imagine that you were um, you were a an Azure MCP server, and you are trying to
There.
diagnose.
I'm blue and I'm white. I'm white and I'm blue. Okay.
Yep. And I'm coming up with this off the top of my head. Okay. So imagine you um, have a bunch of error logs, right? Or metrics or logs or something that you want to do. Instead of having the user say, oh, can you go get me the last 5 days worth of blah, blah, blah. And then it goes off to a remote server, does a thing. No, it could just return and say, here's all the log files as a bunch of resources. You add it
Hmm.
as context and then say, hey, attached is this log. Go figure out what's wrong with blah, 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 blah. Right. So it's kind of like an example that you could pull back
Yeah.
for it in general. So it's kind of like, here's a bunch of things that the MCP server exposes. Or another good example might be, let's say you run the Playwright MCP server and it goes off and tests your web application, but it's adding screenshots all the time. It could then expose all the screenshots as resources.
Mm, yeah. Okay, so I assume you've seen some demos on this, so I want to pick your brain about how the user interface to all this works. Because one of the cool things about the tools part of MCP is that the tools are self-describing. They say what they do, they say what their inputs are. And if you're just having a chatty chat with an AI, then it's able to deduce through your conversation that, oh, I should invoke this tool because this user's asking something very much that this tool provides. Now, from what it sounds like with the resources, they sound a little bit more manual. Like in VS Code, I can add things to the context when I'm in
Yep.
a little chatty chat window.
Yep.
That's a manual operation. That's not just out of the conversation, it goes finds these things. So I guess this is two questions. Are these resources self-describing in a similar way as tools are, or is it just more like a file name that the user selects from a list?
The user kind of selects it from a list, but it can be described as well. So there's obviously like a file name and then some description for each resource that's out there.
Have you noticed whether any of the AIs can just go fetch that resource without you asking it to, or will it just, is it pretty
I
much a manual process?
Right now it seems to be a manual process. So when I hit add context, I can say like
Hmm.
related files, instructions, screenshot window, problems,
Yeah.
or then I can say MCP resources and it'll like return a list of the resources for me. So for example, like for GitHub, it's a bunch of templated resources. So it will basically be like, you know, you know, you know, it's like GitHub issue or whatever. It'll be like, give me the name of the
Hmm.
repo, give me the issue number, and it'll like go find that specifically down for you. But I think I don't know if it'll find it like while it's doing it inside of the chat. I haven't tried that. However, that being said, like the prompts obviously aren't that way either. You use a slash command. So you use a forward slash and it'll list all the prompts. Just like you can hit the pound or hashtag and it'll show you all the tools that are available too.
Okay, so I'm just guessing here, but it's sounding like the tools are the ones that are self-describing, whereas the other ones are more user control operations. One's a button,
Exactly.
the other's yeah, one's a checkbox.
Exactly. Yep. Totally.
Yeah.
Yep.
But still so useful because I'm always surprised at what comes up when you click that context button. Like I wasn't ready for screenshot, and it was kind of exciting the first time I started doing screenshots
Yeah.
because it kind of does change the game a bit. I forget if it was Gemini Studio or something, but one of them's just doing like contiguous screenshots. Like it's basically just reading your screen the entire time, and that's why it can do like little tutorials and things like that. I find that really exciting. So I wonder. You were mentioning HTTP streaming before for tool outputs and things like that. I wonder if we'll get more streaming resource context too. And given my earlier joke before about there being a committee now for MCP, I'm sure it'll come eventually.
Yeah, totally. And like I think the other thing too that's of interest is that you should be able to attach resources to like ask mode, for example, right? So like in the previous example with tools, you needed an LLM to be able to do tool calling, right? So the model needed to do this. However, if you're just attaching resources or doing a prompt, you could be in ask mode. So you could use like thinking or deep research on it. So you could attach a bunch of stuff to like go deeper on it. And that's really nice if you were diagnosing like bugs or problems or deeper research that you wanted to do on something. So that is kind of cool. And like in some way I could imagine like .NET Aspire like exposing some MCP server because there's already GitHub built into it, but it'd be nice to be able to say, oh, okay, like I'm running my application, like let me see it inside of VS or VS Code. I'm going to tell the team that they should do that actually. It should just kind of show up automatically, right? So it's kind of neat.
Yeah, I would say that's still kind of one downside to using these AIs today, and I really feel like this is going to be a solved problem in the future, so I'm not too concerned. But I've had problems before where I asked it to do kind of a broad change to my code where it really does need to access pretty much every single file. Not change every single file, but to understand what it needs to do, it has to read every single file. And I found in those requests to it tends to fail unless I manually go in there and say add to context and just go select every
Yeah.
single file. And I feel terrible for that. Like I said, oh God, I'm filling up this context. How much is that going to cost? But at the same time, sometimes it's necessary to get it to do those really broad spanning features. So I feel like this will be a solved problem in the future because I can't be the only person running up against that.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. Yeah, I think that would be something solvable for sure. I think like the thing it'll hopefully get smarter and like the models can do stuff because I think like also the other fascinating part here too is there's another feature. This one is I haven't implemented a monkey MCP server, but I'm thinking about it, which is it's called
You have to do
sampling.
it.
Yeah,
Okay.
this one it's called sampling. You can try to guess, but you'll never figure it out. It's a
I'm
weird.
not going to figure it out because sampling means something else in the LLM world. So, as we all
Okay.
know, LLMs actually generate a probabilistic token as the next token. And there are sampling strategies you can use. You can use greedy, where it takes the most probable token. You can do not greedy, where it rolls some dice and then picks one within the probability range of the dice. Another one is like top K, where you just take, or yeah, top K. Say you take the top 10 and then roll a dice against those top 10. So that's a sampling strategy. All LLMs require a sampling strategy. If you've ever sent the little temperature little slider guy, that's all you're doing is affecting the
Mm.
sampling strategy used for it. So that's what it would mean from an AI point of view. Now, what's it mean from an MCP world view?
Yeah, it's different, but basically
Different.
it allows your MCP server to request completions to the LLM that is calling it.
What? No, I think I
So
get it. So it's a yeah, okay. I'll let you finish. Go ahead.
it is you just did it with your hands for YouTube.
It's a callback. Yeah.
It's a
Okay.
callback. We have now implemented two-way circular communication, right? So in a lot of samples you see earlier in MCP servers is people are like, oh, I want to create an MCP server and then I want to call an LLM and do some AI magic on it, right? I want to process it and do something else. So you'll often see like in a lot of the C# examples, like this full one where it's like I'm creating an MCP server that calls in, calls Azure OpenAI services and does some stuff and then returns that back to the user. I don't know why you do that, but you do that, right?
Sure.
Um,
Every day I do that.
Every day you do that. So it's like it's just more advanced LLMs talking to other LLMs and returning stuff in general if you're doing processing and doing other
Well,
stuff.
it's what I was saying about dynamically generating a prompt. You might want to, in order to prompt an AI, you might actually want to use an LLM to
Yeah.
generate that prompt. It's a little circular, but I can definitely see scenarios where that could be useful.
It's true. For example, feedback flow, for example, my feedback application, I might have an MCP server that goes off, grabs all the YouTube comments, and then it does a summarization and it does stuff back, right? So it like is calling an LLM and then returning those results, and then the LLM can process those results and do a bunch of stuff with it. Well, now, for example, your MCP server can make a request back to GitHub Copilot and say,
Yeah.
hey, I would like for you to like go do this thing, right? And so now so then the GitHub Copilot will review it, it'll modify the request, and it'll send the, it'll call into the LLM, do work, and then return those completions back to the MCP server to go do stuff
Oh my
with
God.
work. Yeah, yeah.
I love it. It's so I said callbacks. It's like passing a function pointer in C. It's like a delegate in C sharp. It's hilarious, but it's also useful because I've actually seen real world MCP servers that call to say a cheaper LLM, because maybe like you just want to do some sentiment analysis. You know, you just want to know, is this a positive thing? Is this a negative thing? And honestly, you need AIs from 5 years ago to do that. You don't need an advanced one. This is a little bit different because you are using the advanced one. That's what's, I guess, kind of nice about this. You don't have to insert another access token. You don't have to call to another service. You can just tell the network, please fulfill my request here. Now, my question is, can I run MCP servers request to make this fully circular, James? I want the full circle. I want
I'm
an
sure you could.
Ouroboros of snake biting his tail.
That's a good question. MCP servers today, I could be wrong, I'd have to ask Dan, can't call other MCP servers, but an MCP server technically, I guess, could also be an MCP client, and then MCP's clients could call it. So it's probably possible in some weird, really messed
Don't
up
do it, everyone.
scenario.
Don't do it.
But you're right. So
No,
I think the thing you're talking about is like just like the authentication bit, the sampling bit basically gets rid of the use case of having to do API tokens. But the other cool part is that what it means from a user's perspective, us, is in VS Code, I'm actually able to specify the model selection and permissions of this sampling. So, for example,
okay.
I could say this MCP server can only use GPT-4.1 or OpenRouter or Grok or
Nice.
Claude, whatever I want to do based on the token usage and XYZ that I want, right? Maybe I want something super powerful to use Claude 4, but I actually am going to use my unlimited tokens of 4.1 to do most processing on most things. So what this means from a user's perspective, Frank, I'm a developer's perspective, is that when I send stuff into an MCP server, if it's using sampling, it's using the same tools that I'm using to call the MCP server, right? It's no longer making some crazy web request off to whatever backend and doing whatever tokens and doing whatever it is. And then it's not going to have to worry about driving up costs in general. To the benefit of the MCP server creator, I'm no longer
Yeah.
using my tokens. I'm now using your tokens.
Very important. You're really selling me on this one. Yeah, there's definitely scenarios where you want this. In general, I like to think of MCP servers as classical software, algorithmic software that a person can write. It accesses a database. It has a real finite input, finite output system. It's not generative the way AIs are. But we've learned AI generation is very powerful, so there's definitely a need for all that inside the MCP server. And this is cool because, yeah, it's giving the control back to the user. You really sold me on that one. That's pretty good. It is an Ouroboros, but a good one.
Yeah. So I think that one's really neat. That one's in preview support. So I haven't like figured. So for example, what I could do and what I'm thinking about doing, someone gave me, maybe it was Glenn, gave me the recommendation for the Monkey MCP server, or maybe it was someone else, whoever it is, I apologize. But was to make an MCP server for to use sampling in the Monkey MCP server to basically generate bedtime stories, or like I say,
Yeah.
you could say, generate me a bedtime story or adventure story from this monkey. I'd have the monkey data, and then I could say, hey, and then it would return it back, and it would, based on my monkey data.
Or tell me the life of this monkey or something like that. Make up a
Exactly.
little family tree or something like that. Very cute monkey business. I love it.
Yes. All right. Last one for you.
What
Um,
question?
okay.
You said this is in preview. So by that I'm assuming you mean like Visual Studio VS Code kind of preview. Has anyone else have you checked other clients implementations?
It is in Visual Studio Code Stable Edition under a checkbox that I think is on by
Okay.
default. Yeah. What is a preview anymore, to be honest with you?
Preview just means they haven't written the blog post yet or something like that. I don't know what preview means.
I think what it means in preview is for Microsoft standards is like if you call Microsoft support on the phone, you can't get support for
They'll
preview
hang up on
features.
you.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
Yeah.
They'll say wait till it's under blah blah blah. So
Oh, you're saying there's one more thing though? You've already blown my mind because I wasn't anticipating any of this. You're just like, they're advancing MCP, and I'm like, no, it's done. It's simple. It's fine. You're like, no, man, they're changing stuff. So you're actually blowing my mind this whole episode. But you're telling me there's still one more thing?
that is correct.
Okay, hit me.
So the last one is that right now today, when you do tool calling with MCP servers, you provided the data, and the LLM will try to figure out that data and pipe it through into it, right? So if you had an add a monkey, you said, oh, add a new capuchin monkey that lives in Spain. Now, there might be additional required features, or maybe you just say, I want to add a new monkey. Maybe you don't know what the fields are. So there's another feature
Oh boy.
that the clients implement called elictation. Elictation.
Is that a word?
Nope. Elicitation.
Elicitation.
That's the Zencaster. Elicitation.
Elicitation. Yeah, okay. It's okay. I don't like
Because
it.
you're
Word,
eliciting.
I
You're
guess.
eliciting. I don't like that word
Yeah.
either. But
You're being explicit just to throw in another random Latin word. Great.
so what this allows the clients to do is when it makes a call to the MCP server, it can understand and prompt the user for specific inputs to then
Okay.
send to the MCP server. So right now what happens today is if I'm saying, oh, go get me the issues from this GitHub repo, it is going to guess what the GitHub repo is, or
Yeah.
it could ask you what it is, right? Or I could say, let me add a new monkey, and then now we're forms over data, baby. Fill in that forms. You know what I mean?
This is what I'm saying.
So
We're turning chats in. Sorry.
So for example, you're like iCircuit. Oh, I want to add a new widget. Oh, tell me all the details of the widget, and then it'll figure it out.
Mm-hmm. Right? Yeah, we're turning chats into a programming language. We're doing function calls, explicit function calls with explicit arguments. Yep. Okay.
Yeah.
Funny is now that feels like more of a feature of the AI, the LLM itself. Like it has to recognize, oh, I don't have quite all the information I need. Therefore, I shall elicit more information from the user.
Yeah.
Or is this some kind of syntactical thing, like you said with the prompts before? Can I do like a slash or a hash or a question mark or something or a tilde or something to fill this stuff in? Or is it more just standardizing that when an LLM runs into this scenario, this is how it should prompt back the user?
Yeah, so this one is a client feature. So when you talk about model context protocol, like MCP servers are one part of it. MCP clients are the other part that connect to the servers. So in this case, this would be like Copilot or VS Code that is implementing the elicitation or sampling client features. And then on the other side, the servers need to implement as well, right? So there's this client needs to support it, and then server needs to support it as well, right? So for example, in sampling, it says like, I think in the MCP docs, it's like, I think Claude Desktop doesn't support it yet or something like that, or one of the two.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I'm less excited about this, other than it does fill in what I always had as a question, like, what does it do with the arguments or the parameters that it doesn't know how to fill in? If it doesn't have the correct arguments for those parameters,
can ask you.
What does it fill in? So this is probably a good thing. I'm making me really curious what the heck they've been doing in the past, because I always assumed if it had like half of the arguments but not the other half of the parameters, then it would elicit from you it needs.
Yeah,
but so it wasn't before.
Well, so for example, like what I've seen happen, like with the GitHub MCP, I think there's a lot of ways of controlling this, but I'll tell you how I control it. Is today, and I'm like, hey, go get me my open issues for this repo. At least in the very early versions, and it might have evolved past this very quickly to figure things out, but it would say, okay, I'm in the iCircuit app, so let me go to iCircuit/iCircuit, org. It doesn't know about my username, right? It can't crawl. It doesn't know about it. It's like a personal access token. It just guesses. So what I would do is I would create a Copilot custom instruction. I'd say, this project is listed at Frank Kruger/iCircuit, right? So every single time it makes a prompt to the LM, it passes my custom instructions, and now it always knows where this lives. So now, for example,
if it were a program, okay. If it were a programming language, we would call that dynamic scope instead of lexical scope. It's just funny to see how all the early programming mistakes are being made here. Anyway, please continue.
So now it could just prompt me and ask me, and then it could store that, right? It would know, okay, I understand, like this project is in this repo and this thing, like the first time, because what would happen before is like before you sent the message off to the MCP server, it had a drop down of the JSON and you could see if it was right or wrong, and you could edit it before it's sent. It tells you the request.
Oh yeah, right. Okay. That's fun. I never actually saw that UI. It's a little drop down. MCP was always just kind of magical. It just kind of went off and did its thing.
It's
I
because
guess I never clicked the drop down.
when you click continue and you say go, it's because there's a drop down, and the drop down has the full JSON blob that gets passed in.
Never looked at it.
Yeah, right. That's right.
Funny. Usually I click on all the things, but man, that one I missed. 100% just missed.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So now I can expect to be asked 20 questions for every tool call. Can't wait.
Yes. Anyways, so there's SDKs for everything. As you can grab SDKs, build them all. All these new features are in the C# SDK because I've been using them, including sampling and resources and all this stuff. So you can go do it. And they have, there's now there's a Ruby SDK. So if you want to program in Ruby, you can do that. Or Swift SDK, you can do it.
Yes.
There you go. Yeah.
Oh gosh, don't do that. The string handling in Swift is so hard. I'm just making fun. This is fun, man. Like when you first brought up this topic, I really rolled my eyes really hard, like all the way back. And actually, I've actually found this really enjoyable. So thanks for making us all power users, and hopefully making us, since we're all devs here, right? We're all writing apps here, and all our apps are just going to become MCP servers in the future. I think it's good to keep up with this stuff. This seems to be the standard that's winning. Thanks to the hired professionals.
And think about what you just said too, which is that your app can also just be exposed as an MCP server. So for example, like the Figma MCP server ships inside the Figma app. It's in the app. It's in it.
Yeah. Well, especially with the remote stuff. I mean, technically you could just do like a local host remote.
Totally.
I don't know what the security models are. Like, like browsers got really weird about localhost and all that kind of stuff. So I have to dig into that exact stuff. But gosh, it would be wonderful if in iCircuit I could just open up a port and run a little web server there and just have that acting as an MCP server.
Imagine a world where you have the MCP server for iCircuit, but then you use like GitHub Copilot or Claude Desktop or something else, and you're actually creating the entirety of the circuit without touching iCircuit.
And honestly, I'm fine with that because like I might want to just describe to an AI, I need a voltage divider that takes this and does that, and it spit all that stuff into my app rather than me as an app developer having to add all that chat UI stuff to every single app. It is better to have a good chat app and just have that spewing out to other apps. And then my app can do the hard part of actually simulating and improving that it works correctly.
Totally.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. And I hope that future comes. I hope Apple's security model allows us for all this stuff to work, honestly. That's what I'm really doubting is the stupid networking security model.
Yeah, we'll see. Well, let us know if you're using it as MCP features. I've been diving through it. I've been loving it. I'll put a link to my YouTube video, or you can just find it. James Montemagno, it's there. Maybe Frank will do a video on how he uses MCP servers on Frank Codes on YouTube. Go check him out. Stay cool, my friend, and go change your shirt because it's probably all super sweaty now. So sorry about that.
Only every 3 hours. It's fine. New t-shirt every 3 hours. Yeah.
All right. Well, that's going to do it for this week's Merge Conflict. So until next time, I'm James Montemagno.
And I'm Frank Kruger. Thanks for watching and listening.
Peace.